because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are, and we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Welcome to Cows in the Field. This is a show in which we discuss philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today we're getting in the pocket. It's time to discuss Damien Chazelle's Whiplash.
5, 6, and. I want to be great.
And you're not.
We got Buddy Rich here. Little trouble there. You're rushing. Here we go. 5, 6, and. Were you rushing or were you dragging?
I don't know. If you deliberately sabotage my band, I will gut you like a pig.
Oh, my dear God. Are you one of those single-tier people?
You are a worthless pansy ass who is now weeping and slobbering all over my drum set like a 9-year-old girl.
So how's it going with the studio band?
Good. Yeah, I think he likes me more now.
I push people beyond what's expected of them. I believe that is an absolute necessity.
I want to be one of the greats. And because I'm doing that, it's going to take up more of my time. And this is why I don't think that we should be together.
And welcoming to the show for the first time, we have my colleague, Lawrence S. Rockefeller, professor of philosophy at MIT. That's okay. I didn't use an article at all, so we're good, right? And
that's great.
Brad Skow.
Thanks for having me on.
So, Brad, we were teaching a class on logic, and I was like, Brad, we should have you on Cows, and you were, I think it was like simultaneous. You were talking about you rewatched a Damien Chazelle film or something. I can't remember what.
I came up to you and I was like, "What do you think of Damien Chazelle?" And you were sort of like, I don't remember what you said, but I was like, I'm in love with Damien Chazelle right now. I'm in a huge phase where I watch only his movies.
Yeah. So tell us, just to kick this off, like what are some of the things you love about Damien Chazelle as a director?
Well, let me just say one thing that I think is common to Whiplash and La La Land and First Man is that they're all about these characters who like are aiming at greatness and these almost unachievable goals. Maybe that's a little less true of La La Land, but they're a bit arrogant about that. But the movies are sort of seem to be on their side and see there's something good about this kind of like arrogant attitude they have towards their sometimes somewhat inhuman goals they're trying to achieve.
I actually want to start with this because I think this is for me also one of my favorite Chazelles, although I think La La Land is a little higher for me. Laura's laughing at me, but
I'm not.
You're not a La La Land fan.
No.
It's okay. We don't have to get into that.
I won't get into it. It's fine.
But it's because, part of the reason I like La La Land a lot is actually similar to why I liked Whiplash, which is the ending. I think there's this high wire act of like, where there's this going, how is he going to square the circle? How's he going to resolve this conflict? And then the ending is two people looking at each other in a kind of understanding. They're like sharing a moment of understanding.
Oh.
And in La La Land, it like really worked for me in the theater when we saw it. I was like, oh my God, how did he pull that off? That was magical. And I think Whiplash, similarly, when we rewatched it, I was like, yeah, this really works. And I think it works for a lot of people as well. In particular, I think it really works for, at least as far, this is anecdotal, but I think this movie has been quite popular among younger people, among Gen Z in particular. And I'm not actually sure why that is, but I'd be curious if you have any thoughts on that, Brad. Like, did you show this to your kids? Have they seen it?
I did watch it with my 14-year-old, even though the language is definitely
it's kind of
rated R language.
Yeah.
But he's a quiet kid though, so I talked about it a little bit, but it was mostly me telling him what I thought was interesting about the film, and the question of whether Fletcher's philosophy of greatness is correct or not. But he didn't have a lot to say in response. He just said, "That's cool."
It didn't sort of grip him or like.
No, I think he found it interesting, but not in a way that he could. I actually told him, asked him if I could call him during this podcast.
What did you say?
He said no.
Yeah. Fair.
14 stuff.
I said you should come. It'd be good to have you. We could you could be my the guest special guest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't want to do.
No.
Guest of the guest.
Yeah.
Well, he's invited back anytime.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we could do we bring him back as a secondary guest. Okay, well,
But, he's a very interested in art,
okay.
and so I was curious from his perspective, which I didn't really get, but what are his ambitions and how does he think about how to become a really good artist? I think that was sort of why I wanted him to see the movie.
I don't know why it's a Gen Z.
I don't
It's
know.
a Gen Z favorite. I mean, the most superficial thing I thought of immediately was like, is it just like the Gen Z Devil Wears Prada? Like we like a
Abusive
mentor,
mentor
an
film.
abusive
Yeah.
mentor that like eventually our striving person gets there in the end. I don't know, but
I mean, one crazy hypothesis, which is based on absolutely nothing, is that that kind of relationship with an authority figure, a teacher of any kind, it must be completely alien to them, because I feel like that's been it's so frowned upon to be even a little bit like that now. Like when we were kids in like the 80s and 90s, like there was like the tough gym coach, like that was the thing.
yeah.
And no one batted an eye. They weren't like hitting the students, but they were like tough on you.
Yeah, or maybe
You didn't think
like
that was
using
but
an
now,
occasional
like,
slur.
that's much more, well, this casual homophobia.
Yeah.
But,
like in Texas, I'm it happened.
I feel like now that's much more frowned upon.
It's true.
And maybe that's part of their interest in the film is this like very alien and alternative way of conceiving of that relationship.
Yeah, I think I was thinking one of the things that I find a little tough with this movie is I almost don't believe that there could be somebody as
interesting.
as obviously horrible as Fletcher. I'm like, this wouldn't be able to be going on. But then again, that's very naive of me because I've read about, I know what Harvey Weinstein was like, not just what he was like to women, but how he was to everybody.
Yeah.
Like this isn't, Harvey Weinstein had millions of dollars that he was playing with, and this guy doesn't, but he does have people's careers in their hands. And so like you can get away with a lot that way.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes when he's like screaming vitriol and like slurs and yelling and throwing things at the kids, I'm just like, he can't, come on now. I don't know if I believe it almost.
Well, what's so interesting about that abuse dynamic of the character, I think, is that he simultaneously does that, but then he comes in the next day and is crying because his star student died. Now, he doesn't reveal to them that the student has committed suicide and depressed and all that, but he clearly does care. And there's that moment too at the music competition where he's giving high fives to the young daughter of one of his former students. And so there is this sense in which I think it's ultimately manipulative, but what he's doing is he kind of brings you in and makes you feel like, oh, he's a good guy. He just cares about getting greatness out of these students. And then he turns around and, screams at them and this has all this casual misogyny and homophobia and so on.
The moment in which he cries and says that Sean died in a car accident.
Yeah.
That's the same practice rehearsal in which he then does the 4-hour
Yes, I believe so.
drum torture
But that
fest,
seemed to, so I
right?
find it challenging when you sit down and think about it to understand Fletcher's psychology. Because there's what he says, which is, I'm doing this to try to like find the next Charlie Parker. And then you see him being nice. You think, well, so he's not doing this out of like just being a purely
Because he's
evil
a
person or
psychopath
anything like
or
that.
a sadist or
Yeah. But it's hard to fit that all together with all the pieces of the film. But in that one, that one seems fine for fitting it in with his psychology because he's very upset that this person who's close to him died. And he just takes it out on the drummers by making them take turns bleeding on the drum set.
Yeah, I see.
Right. And it's so twisted though, because I'm sure he doesn't think this person died and I'm at all at fault, because I don't think he thinks that way. But to find out that somebody died because, maybe because your abuse was so horrible that they chose to harm themselves and end their life, to then turn around and then just perpetuate that behavior is crazy town. But again, I don't think he don't think he reads that. Like, or maybe he just thought Sean quit. You know
well,
what I mean?
I think it's actually kind of interesting why he's crying. So he could be crying because he's sad that his maybe favorite student died. He could also just as a matter of like, I'm sad because somebody I know died.
Yeah.
Who I cared about. He could also be crying because he's realized that student is not going to be Charlie Parker. Like this student isn't going to be the next Charlie Parker.
Yeah.
And because he says that later, he says this thing like, I never had any Parker's.
Right, I never found my bird.
I never found my bird. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, this character is so slippery. And I think part of,
Right, he's like, I put blood, sweat, and tears into this guy, and he's not it either.
and he's not it. And I'm
Yeah.
so bummed about that.
His name was Sean Casey. I found out this morning that Sean died yesterday in a car accident. And I wanted you guys to know he was a beautiful player.
But another way in which he's slippery, in the scene, like when they have the conversation in the pub, and then afterwards he says, "Oh, I've got a band. We're playing at the Carnegie Hall, and I need a drummer." It seems completely sincere.
Yeah.
And then later it comes out that it was all just some ploy to destroy Andy's future as a drummer.
Yeah.
But it's hard to square. I can't believe that he wasn't sincere in that moment, because you would think there'd be some hint that like there's something devious going on.
Yeah.
That's the part where I have trouble fitting it all together.
Yeah.
I mean,
JK, we just want J.K. Simmons to be our dad.
well, no. I mean, he's a deeply manipulative guy. I mean, I think the other aspect of it is that he clearly enjoys the torture that he's inducing on these students. He's enjoying it at, I mean, nowhere clear as to me is it that the first scene of the film. So the first scene is this kind of slow pan or zoom into Andrew on the drum set. He's practicing, and Fletcher, J.K. Simmons, comes in, and what does he say? So he says, "Did I tell you to stop playing?" And then and then Andrew's like, "Okay." So he starts playing, and then he says, "Did I tell you to start playing?" Like that kind of, it's like sort of joking, but he knows, of course, he can get away with it because he has this power imbalance. But I think he just gets a kick out of fucking around with these people, and then he takes it too far. He goes to these extremes, and then he rationalizes it by saying, "Well, I'm making them great or whatever." But
Can I give you an alternative theory about
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you were.
But I was
you
just
weren't
thinking.
finished.
I was just thinking like that's one sort of read, is that he's sort of like there are all these things going on simultaneously. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
So as I watched it again recently, which was I think the third time I've seen it, I noticed that, well, for one thing, like every other musician in the movie is just this empty backgroundy person. Like there's basically no other characters
Yeah.
besides Andrew, Fletcher, and his dad,
And the leprechaun.
and the girlfriend. Well, yeah, and then the other drummers are sort of characters, but yeah.
Not really. Yeah.
But no one tries to push back on anything that Fletcher does.
yeah,
Except Andrew, but it takes it takes him a while to really start pushing back. And like I think the first time he really does is when Fletcher brings in the ringer and says, "Well, I'm looking for someone else who might be able to play this part."
Yeah.
And he storms into Fletcher's room while he's on the phone, saying, "That's my part. You can't." Like he's standing up to him in a way you never see anyone else try to stand up to him. So one theory about Fletcher's methods is he's such a jerk in these ways because he's looking for the person who will push back against that.
yeah,
Because he thinks that's the person who has this potential. And Andrew, they call him different. Andrew, he pushes back in many places. Like there's the moment right before they have the fight on stage where he tackles Fletcher on stage, where he says, "You can't. This is my part. You can't give it to someone else." And Fletcher said, "Your part. It's my part. I lent it to you."
Yeah.
It's like I could have cut you at any time, and Andrew doesn't accept that. He's like, "You would have cut me by now if you really didn't think I had it." So he's standing up to him more and more. But the whole throughout the entire movie, even though he gradually starts standing up to him more and more, Fletcher still kind of like is the one dictating the terms of their interactions because he still has this authority over him. And it's not until the final scene when Andrew comes back on stage and starts playing the drums and Fletcher's like, "What are you doing?" But even though Fletcher complains, Andrew is now suddenly the one in charge of the relationship. And that's what flips at the end. And I think it's interesting.
yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I think it's compatible with that Fletcher gets a kick out of fucking
I
around
totally
with
agree
these
with
kids,
that. I
you know?
totally agree with that.
But it could be that. I mean, it's also compatible with that he doesn't actually enjoy this. He just sees it as a means to an end for doing exactly what you said, Brad, which is to find the person who's willing to stand up to
Person with the
his
grit.
bullying.
Yeah.
Who has the grit. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I do think it is interesting how to think about this in relation to the kind of psychological torture that he puts Andrew under. So one of the things he does is he butters him up with this conversation early on when he brings him into the band. He's like, oh, how's it going? Do you have any musicians in your family? Trying to get information about his family, which he then immediately in the next scene uses against him.
Point by point. It
Yeah,
was almost
point
like
by
he's
point.
like, let me just get out my psychological torture Mad Lib.
Yeah, exactly.
Your mom is gone. Got
Gone.
it.
Yeah,
your dad
a
is
failed writer.
Got it. Yeah.
And then, and it's clear he's done this with the other drummers too, because I'm not totally clear because he uses Irish Americans or Irish slurs towards the one guy and he uses gay slurs towards the other drummer. So he's clearly like learned something about their family life or personal life, and then he weaponizes it. But then the other thing he does is he kind of insists that they cut everything else that's not the drums and him out of their life. So he's constantly trying to like isolate them and make them dependent on him for their self-worth or whatever. And that's where the role of Andrew's dad is interesting because he pushes back on that. And when he does push back on that, even after, this is like the scene when Andrew's now been kicked out of the school. What is it called? Schaefer. And the dad has like arranged a lawyer to like, bring charges against, or at least, I don't know, bring an accusation against Fletcher. And Andrew's at least initially unwilling to do so. He's still kind of reflexively like feels dependent on this guy. Like,
that's not how I read that scene.
Oh,
not as dependence. I read it as that he, despite all the abuse, he agrees with Fletcher's ideals and thinks that, and still admires Fletcher for the ideals he has about what great jazz is and demands. And that's why he feels like
Fletcher didn't do
telling
anything
the
wrong.
truth would betray him.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're similar because he is like in the situation of like, I'm on this guy's team, so to speak.
Right.
And even though this guy has effectively destroyed my music career, and made my life miserable.
Right. And his response to it too is like, why would you do this to me, to his father? Because he's just like, you don't understand my life. You still don't understand my life.
Yeah.
Can we
Even
talk
as you're
about
trying
the
to save
dad?
me.
Yeah, let's talk about the
that's our
dad.
moment to talk about the dad.
Yeah. I think the whole relationship between Andrew and his dad is fascinating. There's this question, which I have for you guys, is do you think he's a good dad? But there's this he's the anti-Fletcher in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one revealing scene early in the film that really sticks with me is when they go to the movie theater and they're sitting there and someone walks behind them and bumps Andrew's dad with his popcorn. And Andrew's dad says, sorry.
Yeah.
I was like, Fletcher would not have said sorry to the guy who just bumped him in the head.
He would have thrown that popcorn at his face.
It's the mirror image of the personality of the teacher. But it's, at the end, right, Andrew walks off stage and his father gives him a kiss and a big hug, and then he pushes him away and goes back on stage.
Yeah.
There's this weird sense in which Fletcher is the role model he needs and not his. So maybe one interpretation of that is that the role model he needs is Fletcher, and then his dad doesn't have what Andrew needs in a role model. But another interpretation is he needs both, and then his dad isn't enough. But that's not to say that what his dad provides is not right.
I mean, I'll just throw a third interpretation, which is that Fletcher is the devil, and Andrew and his dad is the angel, and he's really fallen by the ending of the film. Like, this is actually like a deeply tragic ending. But I mean, on the dad, I mean, he's, if you think of the movie from the dad's perspective, he is an extremely patient and forgiving and loving parent in the sense that his son is constantly making these, from what he sees, mistakes, and he's there to just help him sort of again and again without judgment, is for the most part.
I don't think that's
okay,
true.
so you think he is
No.
Well, so
judging
I think
Andrew?
he very much thinks that Andrew's ideal, his ambition to become one of the greats, is bad for Andrew, and he thinks Andrew shouldn't
Yeah.
be that way.
Yeah.
But does how much of that does, I mean, besides, okay, there's the dinner conversation, which we should definitely talk about. But
Yeah.
besides that, I mean, his actions seem to suggest that he's supportive of Andrew. I mean, he sets him up with an apartment after he's kicked out of music school, and they have this kind of ongoing relationship while he's at music school. And he is at music school. I mean, the dad is clearly probably paying for this.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he is supportive, despite the fact that, yes, I agree that he himself is skeptical of it, but that makes his support all the more kind of magnanimous.
Yeah, it's a hard thing. I don't know. We have not been this point in our parenting where we're going to, like, if we have a child who is like who has a dream.
Yeah, he just wants to be the best Minecraft player.
That's his current, you know,
They all go through that
current
phase.
need.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, it's going to put him in, like, the thing that I like thought about, like, with a little girl is like, what if she gets really into gymnastics, you know? Like,
Yeah, right.
I don't know why I'm scared of gymnastics, but, you know, I'm like, you know,
Any hyper competitive thing.
Any
a
hyper
parent might
competitive thing,
worry.
but also something that like might destroy their body or might destroy their psyche, or, you know, but also like is their passion, and they could be great, but they're going to have to push really hard to do it and make serious sacrifices and not have a balanced life, perhaps. I don't know how you walk that line. And I think, I mean, so you wanted to pursue music. How did your parents deal with it?
So here's partly why I have a lot of sympathy for Andrew's parents. I did go through something similar where my parents
Did your parents say a lot of, you've still got options?
They did, but they were supportive in the end, and I think the actions spoke louder than the words. Even though my parents were inevitably concerned about my decision to become a music major my first year of college, in retrospect, I think they were right to be concerned, and I dropped out of music school. So in my case, it made sense. But they were never.
But if you had Fletcher throwing things at your head, do you think you'd be the next Charlie Parker? Sorry.
We'll get into that. But they were both financially supportive and sort of emotionally supportive, and so on. And I think Andrew's dad is all of those things. Like this dude is clearly, I mean, he's a drummer at the top music conservatory. So he's clearly made sacrifices to get there. And the only way you can make those sacrifices is if you have supportive parents. Just that, I think, is basically, you know, generally true. You know, you're not making those sacrifices if your parents are like, no, you're going to medical school, we're not going to support you being a jazz drummer. And so he is supportive, but he's also concerned, and so were my parents. And I think like that, I find what I find so likable about his dad is that he's always there to pick Andrew up when he falls, and he falls again and again in the film. And he never, you know,
it's not an I told you so.
Yeah, exactly. There's no I told you so, and there's also no like I'm cutting you off. Like there's no these conversations where he's like, where he would effectively just be like, this is the last time you're gonna screw up, kind of a thing, which could very easily have happened.
But that's just a part of there being just no toughness to him at all.
That's right.
Yeah. I think what hurts I was going to say Miles, what hurts Andrew too is like the tepidness of his enthusiasm.
Yes.
For what
He doesn't understand. He's not a jazz
He
guy.
doesn't understand jazz, but like to see, like, I think the dinner scene is like is important and very much from Andrew's somewhat warped perspective. I think that dinner conversation, but everybody was like, all hail King football player.
Well, yes.
And it seems like his dad kind of lights up at like his cousin's achievements in a way that like when why do I keep calling him Miles? When Andrew was like, I
that's
got
the
it.
actor's name. You have a thing about him, I guess.
When you know, every sort of update that Andrew gives his dad's just like, oh, okay. You like that guy, huh? You seem to really care about his opinion. You know, like he has kind of.
But I, at the same time, look. I want to hear Brad's thought, but I just have to say, if I was Andrew's dad in this situation, and I've been hearing like, yeah, this guy's pretty hard, but he really likes me. I would be, alarm bells would be ringing
Yeah.
and you'd be like, this guy sounds like an abusive dude.
Yeah.
And how do I somehow communicate that to my son to prevent him from being sort of emotionally destroyed by this?
I know. I'm
And
with you.
yeah,
I wouldn't
and,
be able
you know,
to stop myself.
He has various missteps, which we could talk about in the dinner scene. But anyway, but Brad, I think you have a different read on the character of Andrew's dad, potentially.
Oh, I don't know. I meant just ambivalent. Like I agree with a lot of what you said. I would probably do what his dad does also for my child. But I think if you look at like what ideal fatherhood looked like in various different historical epochs and cultures, like there are some where the ideal father is like Fletcher, and where Andrew's dad is like a complete failure.
Yeah.
Like ancient Sparta is probably like that, where like if the father were like not trying to whip the sons into tough shape, and the society would think that they weren't living up to what they were supposed to do. Now, I'm not saying I agree that is an ideal, but I think it's an interesting perspective on the film to think about, like, what ideal of fatherhood does the film think is the right one?
I think this question is, how we answer this question is going to depend on how we answer the question of whether we think Fletcher's methods are in the end in the service of, like, you know, are good in the sense that they're both aiming at something, a good outcome, and potentially conducive to that outcome, or even necessary for that outcome. So, I mean, maybe we should just talk about that. We can come back to the dinner sequence, I think, because I think it's just a lot going on in that sequence.
Yeah.
I read the dinner sequence just myself as quite negative of Andrew. I think of it as like I think the film is kind of quite sort of
This
harsh
is when
on him.
Andrew's starting to turn into the villain.
He's becoming kind of villain-like in that sequence.
Yeah.
But do we, before we get there, but do we think that, like, I mean, there's two questions I want to distinguish. I'm happy if you want to take either, Brad. One is like, do we agree, just us in this room or listener to this podcast or viewer of the film, with what Fletcher's sort of view about art and greatness, and this, which might be summarized broadly as like, to achieve greatness in art or in sports or in whatever domain, that does require some degree of tough love, let's say, broadly speaking. And secondly, that's one question. The second question is, do you think the film actually endorses that perspective? I mean, certainly Fletcher does, the character of Fletcher does. But do we think that the film does as well?
Well, as for the first one about, wait, what was the first one?
There's just like, does greatness
is he right?
In
and then
the,
the
is
film
Fletcher
agree with
right?
Him. I mean, I think he's right to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the problem is, on the one hand, you see him do these horrible things, and it's very hard to get on board with thinking that that's okay. Like,
maybe
physical abuse, throwing chairs at people's heads, the blood making them play until they bleed. You think, like, there's no way that's necessary. But then he says, what's the quote when he and Andrew are talking?
Oh yeah, the worst.
Like there are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't think that those are the most harmful words in the English language, but I do think he's right that, like, when someone does an okay job or they do something that's pretty good, if you don't, like, convey to them that there's a big gap between what they did and greatness, then, like, if they aspire to greatness, you're doing them a bit of a disservice. So I think he's right about that, but there's a huge gap between thinking, like, brutally honest feedback of some kind might be useful for people who aspire to greatness and, you know, slapping people on the face until they get the tempo right.
Yeah. You guys locked yourselves in rooms to become philosophers and just like proofed until your hands bled.
Look,
right? That's what it took.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, there's a certain degree to which, of course, here's the broader way of maybe putting this out. Like, a certain degree of adversity is helpful often in stimulating growth. I think most people can agree with that. Like, you have to undergo some sense of, you know, either failure or setback in order to recognize what you need to do to sort of overcome that. And that often spurs sort of, you know, growth or, you know, greatness in someone. And so if that's right, then you might think, presumably it's right also at the highest level. So if you want to get someone from like 99 to 100, they're going to need some adversity to do so, and maybe that's plausible. Of course, you're right though too that like there's a huge gap between that and what exactly that adversity requires, and manufacturing that adversity in a way which is both physically and psychologically torturous of someone might be not plausible. And what reason do we have? I mean, you also might think like, what reason does Fletcher have to think that his method is the one, in which case you might think, he's just out there flying by the seat of his pants, and he could just pick any method. There's like lots of different methods of inducing adversity in people. I mean, he's got it because he thinks of this Charlie Bird story, which is apparently apocryphal.
I'm sure. Yeah. I'd be surprised if it were true.
Yeah, and so, but like it is.
I think there was a symbol, but it more like was at his feet.
Yeah,
not trying to decapitate him.
In the world of the story, though, Fletcher does have some track record evidence.
That's true.
Like he's at the #1 music school in the country. Everyone wants to be in his band. There's no other alternative conductor who uses other methods, but who also is as sought after, and who turns out people who have achieved what his students achieve. So, in the background to this particular story, in the world of the film, like it seems like he's right.
Yeah.
Or at least his methods work.
He doesn't himself, he admits he hasn't found his bird. So
That's true.
So he, by his own admission, is like, it has not actually succeeded.
That's true. And that's an important
way
clue to how to think about that fact that he doesn't think he's pulled it off.
Okay, so but then that's also a question of like whether the film endorses it. I mean, there's this psychological question that we're kind of interested in, but I think for the purposes of this conversation, the more interesting question in a way is whether the film thinks Fletcher is right. And so to answer that question, we have to think about the ending of the film, which is a really, really interesting ending to the film. And in the ending, I'll just briefly describe what happens. Fletcher has brought Andrew out, humiliated him by not preparing him for the piece that he's about to play, and then Andrew can't sort of play it correctly. He sort of walks off the stage humiliated into his dad's arms, but then goes back onto the stage, starts drumming.
I'll cue you in
for Caravan.
Caravan.
Yeah,
Caravan.
And then just sort of takes control.
He takes control of the band. Yeah.
And then you get this kind of Fletcher at first is upset, but then he starts to like go with it, and he starts to bring in the band and everything, and then they start to sort of work together. Yeah, like he's sort of offering tips on how to do the solo. He's like, go slower, go faster, whatever. And because at first it's antagonistic. He goes in there and Andrew says, "Fuck you." And then Fletcher comes over and he's like, "I'm going to ruin you," or whatever. And he slams the cymbal in his face. So at first it's antagonistic, but then it becomes slowly over the course of the solo on the same, they're seeing eye to eye for the first time. And then it ends with this sort of the two eyes, basically just shots of their eyes and Andrew smiling. And like it sort of ends on this triumphant, in a way, note. But how should we interpret that triumph? Now, one read is, this is what he needed. And now he's going to become a great drummer. He came out and just did this amazing drum solo.
I thought it was like Neo realizing he's the one. I thought that was the moment. And that Fletcher can't hurt him anymore because now he's found whatever he needed to find in himself, so that it doesn't matter what Fletcher says or does.
Oh, okay.
He's immune to that now.
Yeah.
In fact, he now has power over Fletcher because Fletcher's not himself, doesn't have a future as a great jazz musician, but Andrew might.
I see. So I was thinking, okay, good. That's another interpretation. I was thinking one interpretation is Fletcher was right. He got Andrew. He like did this thing. Andrew's all along been kind of grappling with whether Fletcher's right, and maybe sometimes he's in on it and sometimes he's not. But he's now come to become the great jazz drummer, and it's of course only through Fletcher's methods that he was able to do that. That's one read on the triumph. Another read, which you're suggesting, Brad, is like the triumph is an internal one. So Andrew overcomes he overcomes Fletcher.
Yeah.
Whether or not he becomes like a great drummer is another point, but like it's a battle that he had to like.
He's like a survivor.
Yeah, survivor. He had to get out from under Fletcher. Okay, there's another read of the film. I think I hinted at this earlier, but which is that about the ending, which is that Andrew has it's like the first read, but from Andrew's perspective. So basically, Andrew thinks he's become this great drummer because of Fletcher, and thus he's further under Fletcher's thumb. And now he's become like subservient to Fletcher. And now, because he's like, well, I did this thing and it was you who helped me get there. And like, now we're seeing eye to eye, but like in a way, he's now like even further, Fletcher's slave, so to speak. And that would be, I think, quite tragic in a way. And this is, you could think of, again, there's that triangle you talked about between Andrew, Fletcher, and his dad. And he, of course, leaves his dad to go be with Fletcher. And so if you're thinking of like the push and pull between that, and I think, Laura, you mentioned in the notes, you mentioned like the last shot. One of the last shots is it's all eyes. And it's not just Fletcher and Andrew's eyes, but it's also his dad peering through the doors. Yeah. He's looking through the doors. The stage doors on the side, almost with like, and first of all, that's such an interesting shot because he's cut off. So he's off stage. He's behind doors. And he also looks a little worried.
Yeah.
He looks a little concerned.
Yeah, I had copied, this is from Joshua Lee, writing in SB Statesman. Because I think some people feel like this movie just directly sort of endorses Fletcher's behavior, like is like, yay, torture works. I don't think that's true at all, but like, I think that was a pretty common criticism that leveled at again. So Joshua Lee wrote about that, and he said that because he talks about, yes, we get this like cinematic euphoria when they were having this exchange, but what undercuts it is that shot of Andrew's horrified father, and he wrote, helplessly watching his son lose himself as he's watching, he's not going to get his son back after that. That's how this particular person.
To me, that's quite tragic. I mean,
I'd never thought of that interpretation. I guess I'm not really sold on it, just because I think when Andrew walks back on the stage and takes control of the band, he seems to have become a person who could also just walk away from Fletcher the next day if he wanted to. In a way he could never have done earlier in the movie.
I want that for him. I hope so.
The worry, I think, is also, though, that like one is that he might be under his thumb, but the worry is also that he's somehow forgiven Fletcher because he's like,
there is like a huge moment of a connection between them. Well, maybe this is a point to go back to the dinner scene, and also to talk about his relationship with the movie Countergirl, because there are moments. So there's many moments where Andrew appears as a victim because he's being abused, and then there's these moments where he seems to be high in agency and achieving his goals. But there are other moments where he seems monstrous, and understanding those might help us figure out what to think about things in the end.
So in the dinner sequence, then, I mean, one of the things, this comes in the context of the film where he's been given a little bit of praise effectively from Fletcher in that he's been brought into the studio band. He, I think, is this after he's won the?
Yes, this is when he became the core drummer.
He became the core drummer. He won
after the folder incident.
The prize, the folder incident, exactly. Yeah. And so he's kind of high on himself, and he's not a very sort of gracious, humble victor. And so when his family, including his father, sort of expresses a kind of just, they don't really know what to make of his successes, he both tries to explain it to them. He says,
"Yeah, I mean, it's going really, really well. Actually, I'm part of Schaefer's top jazz orchestra, which means it's the best in the country, and I'm a core member. So I'll start playing in competitions. And actually, I found out I'm the youngest person in the entire band."
Well, how do you know when's in a music competition? Isn't it subjective?
No.
Does the studio get you a job?
No, it's not an actual studio. It's just the name of the ensemble. But yeah, it's a big step forward in my career.
Well, I'm so glad you figured it out. It's a nasty business, I am sure.
Which is great. That's fine. I mean, just setting the record straight. But then after the family, are kind of like, oh, interesting. Okay. And then his cousin, who's sort of a football star at some other school, comes in and they're all cheering him on. Andrew takes that as a slight and then has to cut down the cousin and says, well, it's Division III.
Yeah. Right.
And And then this kind of kicks off this. So it's really him who elevates. If you were thinking of it in terms of conversational tone, it's pretty standard stuff in terms of people are, it's pretty normal. And then he raises the temperature when he mentions the Division 3 thing. And then everybody then immediately gets defensive. And then they start, arguing about whether having friends is important or being remembered is important. And I think he says at one point, I'd rather die broke and drunk at 34 and have people at the dinner table somewhere talk about me than die rich and sober at 90 and have no one remember me, which is my read on that is when he's saying that the film, the way it's presented in the film is not endorsing that. The film is sort of suggesting he's misguided in this respect. Even though there's, of course, there's an aspect of truth to that in that, like, yeah, people will talk about Charlie Parker, but I think the film is questioning whether the kind of sacrifices that it takes, if it takes sort of not having any genuine friends, et cetera, to get there, that may not actually be worth it. And the way it's doing that is by portraying him as this kind of petty, hubristic, self-obsessed guy.
He's definitely like completely alien in that family, or at least that dinner table group. Like no one, they're all, besides being interested in sports rather than jazz, like they also value these like close family relationships where he thinks I'd walk away from all of that if it meant I could be a better drummer. And that replays with them. He's saying it's just Division 3. And then I can't remember what they say to him. And he's like, those are 4 words you'll never hear from the NFL.
Yeah. And
then,
I think it was like, come play with us or something.
Yeah, he says, you think you're so great, come play with us. He said those are
right. Yeah. And then that's an interesting moment. This is like a tangent. That's an interesting moment because that's the one time his dad throws him under the bus.
Yeah.
His dad's like, well, what about
or from Carnegie
Hall.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
Lincoln Center. Lincoln Center. They're not calling you. I was like,
yeah.
So that was not a moment where he was being supportive.
No, totally.
It was like,
yeah.
Taking sides against, it's like that Godfather Part 2, that don't take sides against the family in public. Yeah, and then the moment where they're like, well, what is it? What's the quote about? How do you? His cousins say, how do you know who wins in a music competition?
Right.
Isn't that subjective? And he says, no. It's another like huge gap between them. Where they're like, it's all music. People can disagree, and he's like, they don't understand his perspective, and which he thinks is the true one. It's interesting. I looked up the shooting script for this a while ago, and I don't know if it's the accurate shooting script, but in the thing I saw, what he says is the question, isn't it subjective, was no, not really, which is much weaker than what was on the screen, where he just says no. Like there's no doubt in his mind that, of course, whether one person's playing is better than another, there's nothing. People could dispute, but someone's right and someone's wrong. Yeah, is that? Do I agree with you that the movie's against him on that in that moment? I felt like the movie was maybe more withholding judgment than you felt like it was. I don't think it was like endorsing him. I think it was, but it might just be like, look, here's the other sort of emotional commitments or lack of commitments to go along with having this as an ideal, and make of it what you will. But I mean, I guess it does make it look like it has some ugly sides.
That's the concern. I mean, and then the scene that immediately follows it is his breakup with his girlfriend, right? where he basically says, I'm breaking up with you because I can foresee that you're going to end up hating me because I'm going to be so into drums, and I'm going to resent you for sort of holding me back, etc. Which I mean, I think the film is like, I mean, Miles Teller's a good actor, so he can convey this in a way which is realistic and compelling and so on. But I just think that the film is in that moment saying, like, I mean, I think you, Laura, when we were watching, you said the words which are "run away, sister."
Yeah, get out of there.
Get out of there.
You're dodging a bullet.
Yeah, like this guy he's like a toxic guy in this moment, at least.
Or he's just like, I don't know. Honestly, like, I think what made me sort of more on edge is not that scene with Nicole, because I think that's him being completely honest. And she's not wrong that he won't be a good partner. He's like, I can't be with you because I'm going to be a bad partner because I have nothing else in my life but drums, and drums is my life. And he's right about that. And he's cutting her loose.
Yeah.
But I think what's like more uncomfortable is the scene where the first date that they have, where you immediately see that he has disdain for the fact that she does not have the same drive or ambitions that he does, where he's looking down on her. And that, at least in the breakup scene, he has the grace to put it as like, this is a me thing. This is about my ambitions and my obsessions. And like, I just can't take you along for it. Versus like him being like, well, why did you pick Fordham? Well, I'll tell you why I picked Schaefer because it's the best in the country. Why did you pick Fordham? What are your dreams?
Yeah.
You know, like it's so uncomfortable. And I think I like that. I felt that particularly in my soul because like as somebody who has not figured out what they want to do with their life for almost 40 years and is maybe finding it now and has been been surrounded by people who have a lot of passion and a lot of drive. It's an uncomfortable place to be. So I felt that one where I was like that's the scene where I was like, this guy's a monster.
So one perspective on the film and its attitude towards Andrew is that the film's saying the level of greatness he's aiming at requires you have to become a monster to achieve it.
Yeah.
And there's a question of, is it worth becoming that monster to achieve that greatness? And maybe the movie doesn't try to answer that question. Maybe what it's trying to do is just show that both, you can't have one without the other.
Just to say one thing about the breakup scene so you're right that he's being honest. That's right. But I think like it reflects badly on his character in that the only thing he cares about is being a great drummer. And I think there's just something bad about that. I think this reflects badly on you if you only have one desire to the detriment of all these other aspects of the good life. One of which is having friendships and having human connections and things like that. And he's willing to cut all that out in the pursuit of this one thing. And I think that at least the film seems to portray it in such a way, which is reflective. Maybe I'm just reading this because that's my own view too, is that that's not the good life. That the good life is not one where you singularly pursue a single thing to the, exclusion of everything else. And I think the viewer kind of can tap into that. There's like something sort of psychotic about his devotion here. And
it's like, since we're philosophers, I could say it's like Nietzsche and John Stuart Mill. It's like Nietzsche would say, become the monster if that's what it takes to create this amazing work of art. Whereas like us other people tend to think, no, you should have a well-rounded human life that contains many of the things that are good, not just one of them. But it does mean foregoing being Beethoven or whatever. Of course,
Maybe.
That was never an option for me in the first place. But if you're Andrew, you think like, well, that is the choice before you.
Here's another way of thinking of it. I think if you are Andrew, you should think, if you're in the Mill category, you should think of that as a curse, not as a blessing. So you think of it as a curse where you actually have the choice to reach a level of greatness which would require such sacrifices that you would have to get rid of everything else in your life to reach them. And rather than as like, oh, I'm like on the precipice of greatness, and isn't this such a great thing? And when I reflect on a lot of the great sort of, musicians and artists and athletes and so on, we've talked about this actually on this podcast. The Michael Jordan versus Shaq kind of situation where Michael Jordan is like this singular, I will kill you to achieve greatness. And Shaq's like, I'm good, but I also have other things in my life that I value. And like, I think of what Michael Jordan's doing is like a kind of inhuman in a way, contra actual human flourishing. Yes. Oh, great. He did achieve greater heights of greatness than Shaq.
Yeah.
But it seemed like
people are still wearing
him.
Air Jordans.
So what do you guys think would have happened? We can ask counterfactual questions about a fiction. What do you think would have happened if when he calls Nicole after he's been kicked out and to say like, I'm playing, would you want to come to the show? And she says like, I have a boyfriend. I have to ask my boyfriend. What if instead she'd said, if she'd been single and if she'd said, taken him back and like he'd fallen in love with her, would he then, do you think he would have like just turned away from these ambitions?
No.
Do you think, because he seems to be having this moment of regret or second thoughts when he calls her, because he does,
Yeah.
just shown by the fact that he even tries to get in touch with him.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true.
And no, I don't think anything else is
Well,
going to
You
rival
think,
his
you think
love
it's
of
too deep in
drums.
him that he was.
I think like he says at some point, my dad says I have trouble with eye contact. I think he has a lot of, I don't know that he's like, that human connection is like something that lights him up the way, will ever light him up the way that drumming does. Like, I mean, it's the sad thing about this movie is like, presumably he loves drumming and it's fun for him at times, but he like, and like that somehow that got stripped away a little bit.
Yeah.
And he watches the video of himself watching and playing
Yeah.
as a kid. And he like looks longingly at the people drumming on the street in New York City. And he has, but like, there's like something that I think like he feels the most alive when he's doing it that
Yeah.
I don't think Nicole's going to do it for him.
Look,
Sorry, Nicole.
It depends for me on how we read the ending. So if you read the ending as like he got out from under Fletcher, he showed him like, I can be a great drummer, not on your terms. This is me sort of forging my destiny. And that destiny involves him sort of learning from his experience and being like, oh yeah, actually, I don't need this kind of psychotic devotion to a singular devotion to one thing. Then I would think, yes, it would be great because he could be a good drummer and have a relationship. And that would be a better life than just being the greatest drummer and having no otherwise, meaningful human relationships. But if you read the ending as like, no, he's fully in the thrall of Fletcher, and actually, I want to give another potential way of thinking about the ending, and in which that is the case. Then I would think, no, this is he can never. This just demonstrates that this character is never going to get out of this sort of cycle. Here's that reading. So the ending, I actually think, is weird in that the film language changes in the ending, suggesting that maybe this is not real.
Oh,
So
really?
because
Wow.
because what happens at the end is to sort of some of the things that cued me to this is like the editing becomes really, really disjoint and weird. It starts cutting to all these weird shots just kind of almost randomly. Also the sort of the drumming is actually like it's one of the first times we actually hear him play an entire
Yeah,
song.
it's the only one.
Yeah. And he's good. It's playing. It's real. The playing is actually, I think, markedly better. In part because I think this is one of the times when they're just using whoever real professional drummer is playing, and not Miles Teller, who's a really good drummer but not a professional drummer. So there's like everything is heightened in that ending sequence. And it's almost like a dream sequence. It's almost like a fugue sequence in the sense that like this is actually representing what is going on inside his mind as like what he would do in a fantasy of like giving the middle finger to Fletcher and kind of showing off like this is what I can do sort of thing. But not what he in fact does. And if that's right, then actually I find that ending extremely depressing, because if that's right, then that shows that this guy is still completely caught up in the grips of this ego war with this guy, and he's really never going to get out from under it. And he will just like carry this sort of petty grievance with him forever. And it will never be resolved because in that reading of the film, he didn't actually do this. So he just sort of sulked off stage and hugged his dad and then led a depressing life.
Can I ask you a related question about like what cinematic techniques might suggest about like what the film wants us to think about characters and events?
Yeah.
This is about the color scheme thing. So it stood out to me that at least for the first half of the film, everywhere he goes is dark or is lit with this sickly green lighting or this very harsh, like, the band he's in, like the entry level band, it's this sort of harsh white. It's not dark or green, but it's got this kind of harsh white light. And then only the studio band rehearsal room has got this sort of warm, welcoming palette to it. What does that mean, Justin? Is that just sort of an outward manifestation of how Miles thinks about those locations, or is there something more objective about the significance?
The other thing I noticed about that, which is that there are windows in the other practice room where he's with the other band, and that's where you're getting the cool light. And then there's no windows in Fletcher's practice room. Now that potentially, one reading of that is that he still has some connection to the outside world
Yeah.
in the other run. And then once he gets into Fletcher's room, there is no connection. He's now in Fletcher's world. He's beholden to this guy entirely. There's no
He's
connection.
there at 6 a.m. and he's there at 2 a.m. Like, he doesn't know what time of day it is.
You don't know what time of day it is, right? Because
like,
there's no windows, right? It's always that warm.
By the way, the timing of the events in the movie is extremely hard to put together because there's the scene where he does the drum off with the 3 drummers. Who's going to get the part? That happens in the morning, and then he's like, and he gave them the music, and he's like, rehearsals this afternoon. And everyone else leaves, and then the drummers have to compete. And then he leaves, and you see him go practice, and that's the practice where he has to like dip his hand in the ice water, and it fills with blood.
Yeah.
And then after the scene where he's practicing, he goes back for rehearsal, which makes it seem like it's the same day. But there's just no way you could have fit all that practice in between like the initial competition and then the later rehearsal. Also, like he was bleeding after how he like magically healed enough to do all that drumming in one day seems impossible.
The film is definitely like skipping forward elliptically in various parts because we know this because he comes in and does the initial playthrough of Whiplash. And then I think it's very quickly thereafter, they're at that first competition, and Fletcher says, this is like, he's lost the other guy's music. And Fletcher says, I hope you play better than you did a month ago when we first.
Yeah.
So there's all these like elliptical jump forwards. So I think like presumably we just are, we're jumping forward in time in ways that is hard to sort of track. But
so it disorients the viewer a little bit because you sort of lose track of. Maybe that's a way in which we're supposed to feel the kind of temporal dislocation that presumably Miles or Andrew is feeling through the exhaustion that comes from having to either practice or rehearse at every minute.
It's also true that these practice rooms often, I remember at University of Denver, they were this way. But at least in the movie, the practice rooms don't have windows. So that's another aspect of like, you just lose track of time when you're in these practice rooms. The thing
probably
about
they didn't if they were soundproofed. They probably
they might not. I can't remember though. I think they might have.
Did you ever sleep in
I've been
one?
in practice rooms and that definitely didn't have
windows.
in
Yeah,
music school.
People did at music school bring sleeping bags.
Is that a thing?
Yeah,
wow.
for sure.
Did you ever do that?
No, because classical guitar you could practice in your dorm.
Yeah,
it was like people that needed to practice on a piano or a loud instrument, and they had to be.
You just weren't doing. I was just wondering if you just for vibes. Like,
no, I mean, I sometimes would practice in there, but I mean, you really
that
would.
was like a thing at Yale where people would like try to sneak into the library. Well, there would be that time. Do you remember the time like when there was like reading period? They would have it open 24/7, or maybe they'd have it open late, but not 24/7. But then some people would like secretly like bring in a sleeping bag and like try to stay in the library.
I mean,
I think that's just for vibes because you can read a book at home.
Yeah, there's some degree of like you're sort of showing off your dedication or whatever.
Yes,
but I think really it would often be people would do this. It wasn't everyone. It was always a few sort of really wild people. But it would be during like getting ready for a big performance or a big, some big thing that they had to do. And so I was actually just going to mention one thing. I mean, so a lot of what it portrays is obviously like ridiculous. Like, I mean, a lot of the drumming stuff that he's doing doesn't really make any sense. Like, it's not really about drumming so fast your hands would bleed.
Right.
It's okay, but that's fine. I don't think that like cuts against the movie. I mean, Richard Brody thought it did because it's like he's like, this is not what jazz is about. But I think what the movie is really doing there is it's using images to kind of portray the feeling of the being lost in this environment that is music school, where one of the weird things about music school is when you get there, you think everyone is better than you, and they are because they're all upperclassmen and so on. And there is this sort of, the teachers are often trying to sort of suss out your ability, and they will, they'll do these things where you have, at least the upperclassmen and the graduate students would have these things where they would perform a piece in front of everyone and then I think they were called salons for classical guitar. And then all of the faculty would just criticized them in front of everyone.
Wow.
And that's just brutal, you know? But it was never mean, but it didn't have to be because you're just on the spot. You're
Right.
so exposed in that setting. And I think that
Did you have one of those?
no, because I never
weren't
got that
upperclassmen.
high. I never got to that
Yeah.
level. And God forbid, right? I would have died. I mean, it would have been game over for me.
That's not true. You can handle that way more than I can.
Yeah, I was not gonna. But anyway, but I think that's the thing is the film captures that vibe of like the feeling of being lost, and this gets it with the scenes where he's like, were you flat? Were you rushing? That kind of thing where it's like, and I love it because the film, is pitched to a normal audience member who isn't going to know the answer to that question. So you're in this epistemic situation that the person who's being.
When I watched it this time, I was actually trying to guess.
You're trying to
Which
guess,
one
yeah.
was it? Was he rushing or was he dragging?
I know, but it's like
You can sort of get it if
you
you're really
locked in.
With
but-
the part where he's slapping him.
Yes. But most people wouldn't. And so you're in the same situation as them. And that is a panic. I definitely felt that panic in music school where you're like, I don't know. And just to be on the spot in that way, I think I
feel that way
real.
when anyone asks me a question at a philosophy talk.
I know. It's
Same sort of-
true. Yeah.
I know. That's what I was saying. You're like, I could never do that. I'm like, isn't that what it's like in philosophy?
It's a little bit different.
Or like a job talk.
Yeah.
But so is so the color scheme like one?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the set in New York, right? Which is
Yeah.
like many movies filmed in New York are sort of love letters to the beauty of New York City, and this is a movie that makes every part of New York City that you might go to outside of Fletcher's rehearsal room look this awful, disgusting, sickly.
I mean, he does pointedly have a bunch of trash images.
Even
in
the scene where he's
beginning.
like this is long establishing shot of the movie theater where he's going to be with his dad. Sort of pans down slowly over even that like so Chazelle is taking his time over this shot. There's no people in it. It's just the image of the street and the cinema, and it is ugly. So he's dwelling on the ugliness of the scene, even though this is where he's going to meet the girl.
Mhm.
He's going to spend time with his dad.
I think that's all really interesting. I mean, and it does suggest he sees Schaefer as this kind of holy ground that's a kind of reprieve from the ugliness of the rest of the world. It's where among other things, jazz music is venerated.
Right.
Whereas in the rest of the world, nobody knows anything about jazz. They're like, oh, that still exists. It's not just subjective. And that also speaks to, I think, something, we do philosophy, but when I was in music school, it was the same thing. You feel like you're with this crew of people who truly understand and appreciate the thing that you care about. And really, most people outside of it don't. I mean, they don't know what it is. They don't know how to appreciate it. And so you do feel like, I'm in my home here.
Not to go on about this too long, but I thought it was like a very daring aesthetic choice for one's first movie. Like in La La Land, Chazelle wanted to make every shot beautiful, and that was served the aesthetic purposes he had in that film. But a lot of you might think like, if this is my first big film and I want to make it, I need to make it look good so people go to look at the screen and are captivated by the beauty. And he was like, not going to do that. He wasn't going to give you that. He was going to make it very ugly for much of the film, except for certain scenes.
It helps also with the contrast of the ending. It helps highlight that ending is so triumphant in a way, in part because it's the first time like the film sort of comes alive. So and I think that helps that hit home. But yeah, it's a good point that like, this is in stark contrast to La La Land. I think this was shot digitally as well, whereas La La Land was shot on 35, which helps. Also, La La Land is using a very sort of bright, primary color palette for the most part. Laura's shaking her head, but I love it. I think it looks great. I think it looks fantastic.
It's pretty. It's pretty. I just don't like the costumes, but that's okay.
Okay. But I will mention this one thing. So not that I think this is determinative of what the film is doing, but apparently Chazelle in interviews has said he thinks that the character of Fletcher is irredeemable.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he thinks that this character is bad.
Yeah.
And he himself was in a competitive jazz drama. He was a competitive jazz drummer in high school. had to deal with, to his mind, an abusive teacher. And so some of this is kind of based on his experiences, him processing this through the characters of Andrew and Fletcher. But I think he himself is quite negative on Fletcher and is thinking of I'm not sure if he would then endorse the kind of tragic ending, but I think he also said in an interview that he wanted to make the happiest sad ending possible. That's what he wanted it to make, and it's like what he was aiming for.
So I guess one extra piece of evidence for it's a tragic ending or there's something negative about it is Fletcher and Andrew is more like Fletcher than he is like any of the other characters, and you see him become more like Fletcher at the end in the scene where they have their honest dialogue about greatness, and he says you have to throw the symbols at the people's heads to get them to sort the ones with potential from the ones that don't. And then Andrew asks the obvious question, which is like, what if the next Charlie Parker got discouraged? And then Fletcher says, but the next Charlie Parker wouldn't become discouraged. And then you cut to Andrew and you see him, I don't know if he says it out loud, but you can tell from his expression that he 100% agrees with that.
Mm-hmm.
And you think like that there's probably plenty of Charlie Parkers out there who would be discouraged by that kind of treatment.
Yeah,
it's not right.
Yeah,
it's just not true.
Yeah. But it's interesting that he thinks that, and that is sort of symptomatic of his.
But like that's his moment because Fletcher pushed Andrew over the edge so that he tackles him on stage.
Yep.
And gets kicked out of Schaefer as a result. Ironically, gets kicked out of Schaefer for physical violence against the teacher who's been physically violent through him throughout the movie. So he's as well positioned as anyone to say, like, you could take it too far. This technique could turn people away or discourage people. But that he doesn't, even after all he's been through, he doesn't agree with that.
Yeah. Which suggests that maybe in the end, when he's doing this thing, like he's sort of seeing him. He's like, this is what Bird would do. Bird would not buckle under the extreme pressure. And so in order to realize my status as the next, not Charlie Parker, but I guess Buddy Rich is who he sees himself as.
Right.
This is what I have to do. And then again, do we read that as tragic or not? It's going to depend on what we think the ingredients for flourishing amount to. Is he flourishing when he becomes a great drummer? If that's what's happening here?
I mean, it's one of the most perfectly timed endings of a film, right? Yeah. Like it's like Inception, where you stop before you see what happens with the spinny thing. Like you cut to black right when he hits the cymbals, and what happens next? Like it's almost impossible to say. Probably by design, almost certainly by design.
Yeah, totally. It is kind of wild that right out of the. Sorry, I thought this was his first feature, but I guess he did a feature before this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it was like it was like very small. But in a way, this is his first feature, and he got nominated for Best Picture. He got 5 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, and then J.K. Simmons won for supporting actor, and it also won editing and sound.
Yeah,
which is wild. I mean, I think it really does sort of. It catapults Chazelle from like unknown, director to immediately A-lister, successful A-list director, and can kind of gets a blank check and do what he wants, and he cashes it with La La Land, I think. But yeah, I do think it's a powerful film in a lot of ways. It does feel to me like a first film in a lot of ways, in that it's it's tight in that way.
Yeah, it's very small. It's only
small.
Like basically 2.5 characters.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think and very few locations. And so that allows for a lot of, you can do a lot with little. And I think he does that. And, but I think we're in agreement that it's a pretty solid film. And whether or not, I don't know. I think Laura's more against Fletcher. Than any of us.
I just find this
like
movie really hard to watch.
I know. I find Fletcher really funny.
I don't think he's funny at all.
I think he's really funny.
But see, the thing is, so I was thinking about this. Our kiddo
I think he's funny on the third watch. I don't think he's funny the first
watch,
time.
You're like, holy shit.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of creativity in his ability to sort of flex and bend all kinds of just horrific slurs.
His insults are
His
very
insults are-
creative.
Yeah.
They're very creative.
My favorite is "I will fuck you like a pig." That is that's like so fun. Apparently, that was improvised too.
Oh, when that like weird guy, someone's walking into the practice room, some random person. Is
Yeah, I
that the
can't
one?
remember when
Yeah.
it comes in, but
Yeah.
I love that. That was a great line.
I mean, I think J.K. Simmons is having a great time. I think he's really wonderful. But like, I think he's a good actor. But I was thinking about this. You know how our kiddo, the thing he hates most to see on screen is disagreement
Yeah,
or
sure.
people getting in
Yeah.
trouble.
Yeah.
Like I tried to show him Ratatouille.
Like, tummy
and I
ache
was
for
like,
him.
it's about a little mouse that sits inside the hat and then they cook things. And he's like, sounds awesome. We watch it and turns out it's a bunch of angry chefs yelling at each other and throwing knives. And Ethan's like, he's like, this movie's horrible. Why is this chef so mad? Can we just get to the mouse in the hat? And I was like, I didn't even think, like anytime somebody's in trouble, anytime somebody yells, he can't
He's like
handle it. And
My
I
kids
can't-
went through a phase like that too.
I don't.
For sure.
Well, I'm still in that phase.
Yeah, right.
Like
Lord,
that's all.
never
That's
let
what I'm getting to. Is that like Justin knows this. If there's any amount of conflict, I curl up like an armadillo. Like I can't deal with it. And so I find this movie just like enormously stressful.
Yeah.
That's all. And I
Yeah.
don't think it's like. And I.
But that's
I
the
find
success
it
of the film, insofar as it's inducing
true.
that
But
kind
I
of
think
stress.
we are meant maybe on the third watch to get some enjoyment out of the verbal flourish of abuse. And like what J.K. Simmons is doing, but I'm not able to get there yet. Maybe next time. But I just sort of spent my time in a ball watching this movie.
Yeah, it's when you told me, Justin, that you rewatched it and that you thought lots of it was funny.
Yeah.
And that was before I'd watched it again. And I was
Uh-huh.
like, funny.
And you're like, you monster.
Where are the funny moments? But then when I was watching it yesterday, I was laughing at certain moments because it's so over the top.
so over
and when
the
you've
top.
gotten past the shock of what's happening and you sort of kind of see how over the top it is,
Yeah.
it is a bit funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you could have some distance to
You
what
can-
What I thought was
whole-
interesting about the most recent watch was even though I was laughing at certain moments, I still managed to like feel emotionally invested in how things played out in the last 40 minutes. So it's not so much that it like pops you out of being able to appreciate what happens, like when the stakes get higher.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a favorite insult? I'm just kidding.
No, but it's "fuck you like a pig" is my favorite one.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, the other ones, there's a lot of racist stuff.
I know,
so
I know,
it's-
Yeah, I'm not going to say any
We're
of it
not
out
gonna-
loud
I know.
or extremely homophobic.
Yeah, exactly. Like we can't quote those parts.
Yeah.
Though, I mean, admittedly, some of them are fun.
I do think. I mean, this is also a stereotype and a slur as well. But like the leprechaun thing just made me laugh because that guy was like 6 feet tall. So I was like, he doesn't look like a leprechaun. He
sure.
just has red hair. But he kept calling him a leprechaun. I think we were watching some video about what the movie got right about music school and what it got wrong. And he points out, he's like, I think maybe Damien Chazelle's working out some like high school issues because that guy doesn't look like he's in studio jazz band. He looks like he's like the quarterback in high school.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Okay. I mean, I was just
No, he was getting way too nitpicky.
Yeah, that guy
Who
was-
cares? It's a movie, sir.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I have a whole other screed about people who nitpick movies in that way. But yeah, we watched like 10 minutes of this video and I was like, why am I watching this? Brad, thank you so much for being here. Damien Chazelle, so you'll have to let me know when you finish Babylon.
Yeah, I
what you
finished
think.
Yeah, I will
Did
now
you-
watch
Yeah.
the rest of the film.
How far
yeah.
have you gotten?
I think I got to like the end of the opening party.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And I
so
was
just
like-
the beginning. Yeah.
I'm kind of bored, so I.
You were bored watching Margot Robbie dance around?
Well, that was the weird thing about it. Is I could see that there was a lot of energy on the screen,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
somehow
Yeah.
it was like
Yeah.
it was like all heat and no light or whatever the metaphor is.
It things will kick
There's
in.
some pretty funny parts
Yeah.
in Babylon. Like actually, like that might be his funniest film. Like legitimately his funniest film.
I mean, I have seen on social media people say like, I don't know why this movie didn't do well in 50 years.
Yeah.
Everyone will say it's a masterpiece.
That seems right. That actually seems right.
I don't know. Yeah. There was definitely a lot of people who had that opinion right out the gate. I think like there was a lot of film
Totally.
critics that were like masterpiece, but I don't know. It's funny. I think like why it didn't hit is like it's at times really unpleasant and
Yeah.
also at times really like cringingly like sincere.
The ending is
It's the combination of La La Land and Whiplash in terms of tones, and that's a little hard to take.
the
sometimes.
ending is awesome, Brad. You'll love it.
It's
the
so
ending,
sincere.
The ending is it was a really cool ending.
Yeah.
I think really truly. And for someone who likes movies, like it's like a lovely ending. It's a love letter to Hollywood. I mean, come on. Brad, so you have a Substack.
I do have a Substack
that you write. What is your Substack called, and what sort of stuff do you usually put on it?
It's called Mostly Aesthetics. And the URL is mostly.substack.com, which I carefully chose.
Oh, that's nice.
How easy it is to say on a podcast. What's it?
Marketing.
There's poetry on
I'm
there.
a marketing genius. I mean, so it's sort of the description is on the tin. I write about the arts most of the time. Lately I've been writing a lot about poetry. Sometimes I try to write about pop music. Sometimes I write about fiction. But then every once in a while there'll be some philosophy stuff or something that's neither. So yeah, check it out.
Mostly.substack.com.
That's right. Yeah.
All right, check it out.
Like and subscribe.
And your primary area, but you've written books on time, the philosophy of time,
and on explanation and causation.
Causation, yeah. So a lot of stuff in metaphysics, philosophy of science.
I aspire to write a book on the philosophy of poetry.
Cool.
But we'll see when that comes to fruition.
A true generalist. Well, check out the Substack, mostly.substack.com. As for us, we are at CowsPod on Twitter and Blue Sky, and you can find us on the web at cowspod.com. Please leave a review if you enjoyed this episode. And also, in 2 weeks, we'll be talking to James Miller about Talk to Her. James Miller recently wrote a book on Pedro Moldovar. All right, see you guys then. Bye.